Welcome back! My name is ballerscuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1987. Today, we're going to look back at the video game crash of 1983. We last explicitly talked about the video game crash of 1983 in 1983. However, the impact of the crash has pervaded the video game landscape ever since, so this is a good time to talk about some of the lasting impacts of the crash. When we talked about the crash previously, we focused on some of the main causes of the crash. Briefly, those were a saturation of second-generation consoles, the rise of third-party developers, the prevalence of low-quality games and ports on the market, and the rise of computers. The first impact of the crash would be the downfall of Atari. Atari saw losses of hundreds of millions of dollars. As a result, Atari's CEO, Ray Kassar, was forced to resign and thousands of employees were let go. Hundreds of thousands of Atari 2600 cartridges would be buried in a landfill as they simply could not be sold. Warner Communications, Atari's parent company, would start selling off parts of the corporation, resulting in a split of the company's industries and its names. Jack Tramiel would purchase Atari's consumer products division, forming the Atari Corporation, which focused on releasing a new computer line, the Atari ST. Development for the Atari 2600, which had dominated the market before the crash, was all but abandoned. The arcade division became Atari Games, a completely separate company, which continued to release arcade games but not at the same level of success. Atari was never able to gain the same level of market share in any of the video game markets again. However, Atari was not the only company to feel the effects of the crash. The crash also saw the closure of several other companies. Those included many third-party developers, such as Starpath, the creators of Dragon Stomper, Bug Byte, the company behind Manic Miner, RDI Video Systems, the creators of Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, and Imagic, the creators of Demon Attack. Other major companies, primarily Magnavox and Coleco, pulled out of the video game industry altogether, not seeing the industry as one with a future for them. The crash resulted in the discontinuation of several consoles: the Fairchild Channel F, Ballerscuba, Atari 5200, Magnavox Odyssey², Colecovision, Vectrex, and Arcadia 2001 were all discontinued between 1983 and 1985. The home console market narrowed greatly at this time, with its lowest point being in 1985. Home video game sales dropped from $3.2 billion in 1982, over $10 billion in 2025, to just $100 million in 1985, under $300 million in 2025. That is a drop of over 97%. While the home video game market suffered the worst effects of the crash, the arcade market also suffered. The arcade market was already in decline before the crash, and it continued to suffer during the crash. From its peak of $8 billion in 1981, over $27 billion in 2025, the arcade market hit its bottom in 1984, earning just $4 billion in 1984, over $12 billion in 2025, a fall of over 56%. The arcade market would recover more quickly than the home console market. Thanks to the prevalence of beat-em-up games such as Renegade and Kung Fu Master, as well as Sega's motion simulator games such as Hang-On, Space Harrier, and Outrun, the arcade market was able to start recovering in 1986. While dates and games may vary, typically arcade games released before the video game crash of 1983 are considered part of the golden age of arcade games, meaning the crash ended the golden age. While arcades would never truly be the same as they were before the crash, the new style of games and cabinets helped bring back arcades to profitability and public consciousness. Computer games, for the most part, avoided most of the impacts of the crash. The sales of computer games actually increased during the crash, thanks to the emergence of what has become known as the second wave of home computers, including the Commodore 64, IBM PC, ZX Spectrum, and PC-88 computers. Home computers were poised to do well during the crash. Computer hardware continued to develop during the crash, including the releases of MSX computers, the Macintosh, the Amiga, and the Atari ST. Computer video games continued to grow during this time as well. In 1984, the computer game market overtook the home console market. Although there was a small decline in 1985, computer games were in a better spot after the crash than they were at the beginning of it. In Japan, the video game crash of 1983 was viewed very differently. Known in Japan as the Atari shock, the crash did not have nearly the impact in Japan as it did in the United States. Since the American home consoles were never nearly as popular in Japan, there was not nearly as big of a collapse in that market. Nintendo released the Famicom in 1983 in Japan, and it became very successful for them there. By 1986, it is estimated that 19% of Japanese homes had a Famicom. Due to the crash, though, Nintendo was hesitant to release their console in the United States. It would take 3 years before Nintendo would release a version of the Famicom in the United States, and even then only after a few test releases in select markets. Sega would also get involved in the home console market in Japan, releasing both the SG-1000 and Sega Mark III consoles there. While these would not nearly be as successful as the Famicom, Sega would find success and be profitable in the home console market, further establishing themselves as a major player in the Japanese video game industry. If there is a defined date for the end of the video game crash of 1983, it would likely be the full American release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in July 1986. This release was seen as the jump start to the American video game market that was needed to fully bring the industry back to profitability. As a result, some people claim that Mario saved the video game industry, although that position ignores a lot of details. Nintendo, of course, had different practices in place to attempt to avoid another crash in the United States. Nintendo limited third-party developers by creating a protection chip, all but forcing those developers to sign a contract with Nintendo before creating games for the console. This would hopefully limit the amount of bad games released for the console moving forward. Overall, the biggest changes in the video game industry due to the video game crash of 1983 were twofold. First, the home console market shifted from a dominance by American manufacturers, particularly Atari, to Japanese manufacturers, particularly Nintendo. Second, home computers became more and more a viable platform for video games, leading to an expansion of genres on the market. While the video game industry had not fully recovered by the beginning of 1987, for the first time in a long time, the industry was on the upswing. That will do it for the story of the video game crash of 1983. My name is ballerscuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we return for another adventure.